As a preamble, this is a presentation prepared for Adtran's Fibre Broadband Symposium held in Melbourne on the 3rd of August in 2022. I thought I'd share it with a broader audience. It's intentionally designed to provide an audience that was largely comprised of fibre network builders with a high-level overview of what OSS is and why it's relevant and complementary. Now, onto the presentation. Hi everyone, I'm Ryan Jeffrey. As the banner here says, I'm passionate about OSS. But for many people in the room, operational support systems are a dirty word. But I'm excited to share why I believe that OSS are a fundamental piece of the innovative future of fibre broadband. When I think of technology, I think of networks. So much of our modern lifestyle comes back to the networks designed, built, and operated by the people in this room. More specifically, this lifestyle is enhanced by the network effect. Now, we usually only hear about the positives of the network effect, of global and massive connectivity. But the network effect can also work in the negative. When failures happen, the network effect means we're massively impacted. But when each car is separate, they're dumb and they break once at a time. But when they're part of a network system, one software glitch can break them all at once. Now, this is a quote from marketer Seth Godin. While Seth was talking about cars, we can apply the same concept to almost any digital service today. Connectedness brings power, but also introduces the risk of contagion. Now, this is true in fibre broadband and OSS alike. The world is increasingly depending upon us. Now, as we know, broadband networks are central to today's many network effects. I like to think of the network as the sell side. Customers that rely on these networks are also clearly important. They represent the buy side. Now, some people only see OSS and BSS as cost centers, but I see them as the profit engine. They bring buyer and sellers together. They're the great connectors. OSS initiate revenues. OSS retain revenues. OSS collect revenues. OSS manage resources, the expensive assets that make up the network. And OSS optimize profitability, which they do by coordinating operations, driving automations, and generally creating efficiencies within the business. They can be a significant competitive advantage if done well, or the reverse if done poorly. Ultimately, OSS are responsible for operationalizing the networks that carriers invest so heavily in. So let's take a closer look at the important box in the middle, the OSS and BSS. Now, let's start by quickly looking at where we've been. Now, I tend to start with the TMN pyramid. We start with the network element layer, which corresponds to the various different network elements such as core, aggregation, and edge devices, or in the case of fibre broadband, OLTs and ONTs, amongst others, all the way out to the customer premises. Now, I'm sure you're already familiar with command line interfaces on network devices. Initially, that's where networks were configured and services activated. But then we started to add extra layers of abstraction that aim to simplify the process of service activation. Each layer abstracts, but connects to a wider part of the network. So going up those layers, the next layer is the element management layer. Each network vendor has their own EMS. For Adtran, this might have been something like the Total Access EMS. Then you have the network management layer, the NMS that was responsible for aggregating various proprietary EMS together, often within a single network domain. Next up, you have the service management layer, which is roughly equivalent to the OSS, which is designed to manage customer services across multiple network domains and bring all of the domains together. Finally, you top that off with the business management layer or business support systems, which keep track of the customers that use the services. There are still aspects of the TMN pyramid in what we do today, but the lines are becoming much more blurry. So let's take a look at where we are now, still relative to the TMN. As we all know, networks are evolving to be more virtualized and more programmable, which continues the trend of pushing control higher up the stack. We're seeing more hosting of VNFs, virtual network functions, on cloud infrastructure, but this is really more applicable to the core devices. Out in the access networks, where infrastructure is more decentralized, appliances like OLTs still tend to exist as physical network functions or PNFs. So this increase in virtualization has seen the rise of multi-vendor access controllers and orchestrators, like Adtran's Mosaic Cloud. The domain orchestrator is responsible for providing a level of abstraction to ensure consistent configuration across PNFs and VNFs. But more importantly, it provides end-to-end path and service provisioning with greater automation and consistency. Further, intent-based interfaces like netconf and Yang are aiming to do the same. Now, just as a side note, some might say that these domain controllers do all the network abstraction and make it really easy for the OSS. Now, that's largely true for virtualized parts of the network, where if one VNF or VM fails, then it's easy to kill it and spin up an equivalent. However, we all know that in fiber access networks, if an ONT device fails or a cable is cut, we can't just kill it and spin up a new one. Instead, the OSS has to coordinate a field technician to come to site to fix. OSS are ultimately accountable for managing physical infrastructure, especially the passive infrastructure that can't be managed programmatically or remotely. Clearly, the lines have become more blurry as networks become increasingly virtualized. Now, these lines are about to blur even further as we step into the future. Now, the next phase will be really interesting. Nobody can accurately predict the future as there are too many variables in play. However, we can see indicators today for where the future might lead. I'd like to share 4 possible scenarios with you today. So the first scenario is around an opportunity for OSS to extend their reach into private networks or the distributed edge. No longer just managing up to the provider or customer edge, the PE or CE, but to manage what's happening inside the private networks and offering value-added services within. Closely related is the second scenario. Now, OSS have the opportunity to manage digital twins and sensor networks that reside within private networks, helping customers monitor and manage their vital operations. Now, OSS have always been digital twins, a virtual representation of physical entities, whereby they've monitored and managed devices, established connections like fiber links, collected telemetry from the network, and provided advanced visualizations to represent the network and service health. With this in their DNA, OSS can be relatively easily extended to monitor, manage, and visualize other forms of digital twins for enterprise. Now, the third scenario, we're also moving into more programmable and autonomous networks. Instead of APIs, projects like P4 are showing that networks and services can be instantiated via embedded code libraries, giving greater flexibility. And by coupling streaming analytics with orchestration at the edge, we can build closed collect, analyze, and correct feedback loops. Now, in the fourth scenario, we'll discuss augmented realities. We talked earlier about OSS being the profit engine of any carrier, having massive influence on the way that work is done across many business units. Just as smartphones have changed the way we do work, will soon be influenced even more profoundly as smart glass units become more commonplace. This will be coupled with clever decision support systems that will help designers, contact center agents, field workers, and others to perform their daily tasks. In the case of smartphones, nobody outside Apple could have planned ahead. But in the case of smart glass, many of the software solutions already exist for us today to start innovating with. We just need to wait for the smart glass technology to catch up and revolutionize our worlds. Now, this short video shows 3 examples that are already available today. The first video shows an example of a guided technician or home user support. It shows an example where augmented reality techniques guide the person in the field or the home when connecting or fault fixing the network. Now, whilst not shown here, this AR solution allows a SME, or subject matter expert back in head office, to provide real-time support for on-site works. And lastly, we see how OSS telemetry can be integrated and used to perform an equipment health check. The second video shows an example of visualizing underground services, similar to what we see today with Dial Before You Dig, only more immersive. You can see here that the technician is using a headset that is relatively cumbersome, but the technology is improving rapidly. And you'll also have noticed how the technology can already be used with tablets or phones today. The drawback with this technique, however, is that it's not hands-free. Via the headset, the technician can visualize all of the underground infrastructure here. And you'll notice also the annotations with additional details such as depth and other identifiers, which are sourced from OSS. Now, in this final video, we take an augmented view of towers and the assets that reside on them. As you see, this is a multi-tenant site, with each carrier's equipment marked in red, green, and orange respectively. Now, I should call out that the conversion of this video has made the image a bit jumpy, but the real experience is much smoother. Now, as we've zoomed in, you'll see that the assets are annotated with key information such as height, azimuth, tilt, and much more, which is appearing in the callouts. This data can be sourced and or cross-linked with important OSS data. Now, as we zoom back out and pan to the base of the tower, you'll notice that cabinets, utilities such as power feeds, and transmission backhaulers linking to the site with these yellow and blue lines off to the right. So, thanks very much for listening to this talk today. We hope it's given you food for thought about innovating on your private broadband networks using OSS technologies. Now, if you'd like to discuss this further with us, you can find us here. Thank you.